Welcome everyone to today's webinar. Just some general information to get things going here. These climate services to the Central Region are brought to you by collaboration from myself for this month, Dennis Toddy from South Dakota, Doug Cluck and John Ives from NOAA, regional state climatologists, and the Midwest and High Plains Regional Climate Centers, as well as NOAA's Climate Prediction Center. The next webinar will be March 20th. 2014, and that's at 1 p.m. Central Daylight Time. These webinars are posted online once they are over, and the two links are provided there on this slide, and so the link to sign up for future webinars is there as well. Just the agenda for today, we'll start going through current conditions, which is really the bulk of the presentation today. We'll look at agricultural update as well as regional impacts from the current conditions we'll talk about. Then we'll look at some forecasts going forward, and then we'll open it up for your questions and comments. So here are the significant events for January 2014. Those pertaining to the Central Region are really Chicago receiving 33.7 inches of snow during January. That was their third snowiest month for the city on record. And at the beginning of February, the Great Lakes were 75% frozen, and that was the largest ice cover for that date since 1996. So pretty impressive ice cover on the Great Lakes. Those other significant events around the country are definitely worthy of note, but not pertinent to the Central Region. This is a January divisional precipitation ranking, and by divisional we just break the states into climate divisions. So this gives you a better spatial representation of the precipitation over the month of January. You can see the Midwest, the northern part of the Midwest, at or above normal precipitation for January, drier when you got onto the Great Plains with some single-digit numbers through Nebraska and South Dakota and on down into Kansas. Fairly normal conditions through Montana and Wyoming, and fairly good precipitation in Colorado for the month of January. If we look at that as a statewide ranking, again, this kind of just reiterates that pattern with Michigan above normal precipitation for January, fairly near normal across the northern tier of the region, slightly below normal for the Great Plains, and then Colorado is the only one coming in much above average for the month of January. This is the same analysis, but this is looking at temperature, and you can see that stark contrast between the western and eastern portions of the United States. We had near normal temperatures through the Great Plains. Once you got into the Great Lakes region, you can see we've got many single-digit ranking divisions through the Great Plains and the Midwest. Once you get farther to the west through Montana, Wyoming, Colorado, and then western Nebraska and southern South Dakota, you start to see us warm up to above average conditions for January. And then here again is that statewide ranking, just reiterating that east-west divide for temperature in January. But again, look at the single-digit rankings for much below average temperatures through the Great Lakes and Midwest region. This is the temperature time series that goes back to 1895 for the upper Midwest, which includes Minnesota, Iowa, Wisconsin, and Michigan. And you can see that this is looking at the December and January period, and that area was the sixth coldest on record since 1895, and it was the coldest it's been since 1984. And just a slew of above average temperatures for that period in between 1984 and the current year. This is basically looking at the 30-day temperature departure from average. Very impressive cold temperatures throughout the Great Lakes region, widespread 9 to greater than 15 degrees below normal for the 30-day period going back to January 20th. Temperatures moderated as you went westward, and once you get to the west slope of Colorado, were actually slightly above normal as they were in southwest Wyoming. But just definitely very cold conditions through the Midwest. This is temperature going all the way back to October 1st, which begins the water year. And again, you see that same pattern with persistent cold temperatures through the region. Again, not quite as bad the farther west you go, but through Wisconsin, Michigan, Illinois, Iowa, Minnesota, North South Dakota, I don't think I missed any there, northern Missouri, very cold temperatures, 4 to 10 degrees below normal for that water year to date. Cold temperatures, most people don't like them, but sometimes they mean beautiful things can happen. The Apostle Island ice caves on Lake Superior are accessible by foot for the first time since 2009. and just spectacular pictures coming out of those ice caves, and you can see all the people lined up. They definitely didn't mind standing in the cold temperatures to get a glimpse. Just looking again, reiterating the ice cover on the Great Lakes, the year 2014, which is currently 85.2% ice covered. I've kind of put a preliminary number on this graph on the top, but looking back through the time series of ice cover, you can see it's the highest ice coverage since 1994, and it's the first time in 4 years that it has exceeded the long-term average of about 51%. So fairly impressive ice cover on the Great Lakes due to those cold temperatures. And then just a neat satellite photo comparing last year, 2013, in the Great Lakes to this year, 2014, much more ice cover in the region this year. We'll switch gears and look at precipitation. This is the map of 30-day precipitation as a percent of normal. You see some spotty bullseyes excuse me, over the northern Great Plains in North and South Dakota and Montana. But the big picture, wet in Colorado and southeastern Wyoming, greater than 200% of normal for the 30-day period, drier once you got into the central Great Plains, and then a little bit wetter once you got into the Midwest, some dry pockets through Wisconsin. But fairly dry conditions through excuse me, South Dakota, Nebraska, Kansas, into Missouri and western Iowa. If we look at the water year precipitation as a percent of normal, you kind of get the bigger picture for the season. Those above normal percents shift a little bit north into the Dakotas, above average conditions predominating the northern part of the Great Plains. Very dry since the beginning of the water year for eastern Colorado, southern Nebraska, and much of Kansas, and spilling into Iowa, Missouri, and Illinois, as well as southern Wisconsin. The northern tier of the region and the eastern part, normal to above normal precipitation so far for the water year. Precipitation is not the only thing. We're not really setting records on precipitation, but we are setting records on snowfall for some of the Midwest states. And you can see here Illinois, Indiana, and Michigan setting records for their seasonal snowfall to date, with over 100 inches of snowfall in Michigan so far for the season. So just to throw some snowfall numbers out there. It's also been windy. It's been very windy in Colorado, and we have very windy conditions right now with winds gusting to 50 miles an hour. But this is looking at the wind speed anomaly for January, and you can see much of the region showing that above average mean wind speeds at the surface. It actually says that Colorado is below normal, so I guess that means we can have worse wind than we're having now. This is modeled soil moisture coming from the NLDAS system, and it pretty much mimics what we saw in the water year percent of normal map. You can see the northern plains with wet soil moisture conditions. The green and blue colors indicate wet soil moisture. The yellow and red colors indicate dry soil moisture. And then the white is just near normal conditions. So you can see the Midwest, very dry soil moisture conditions, centered really on Iowa and Illinois, southern Wisconsin, and then stretching up into Minnesota. You can see right along the Kansas-Nebraska border that we're getting into those lower soil moisture percentiles. And then southeast Colorado has actually had below normal soil moisture conditions going on 4 years now in our drought-stricken area there. These are looking at soil temperatures. So this is from the High Plains Regional Climate Center for the states that have networks measuring this 4-inch soil temperature. Just the take-home point here is that a lot of soils are still frozen. This is taken at 4 inches, but we've got frost depths way lower than that in some areas. Once you get into western Kansas, you start to get into those thawing soils, but much of the region still dominated by frozen soil conditions. We'll switch gears and look at the mountain snowpack conditions across the region, and most basins in the Missouri are reporting above normal snowpack conditions. We're looking at snow water equivalent, so that's the amount of water that's contained in that snowpack up in the mountains. So very good conditions for this time in the water year, ranging from 106% of normal, and that's in Wyoming, all the way up to 152% of normal. That's also in Wyoming. And just in Colorado, we're seeing a few below normal in the Rio Grande and the San Juan basins. But the rest of the Missouri Basin and the Arkansas Basin looking good on snowpack. This graph is showing an analysis of snow cover. It's actually not showing how deep the snow it is. It's showing how much water is in that snow, but it's a good indicator of where the snow exists and where it doesn't. And you can see the Central Plains are fairly free of snow, as is southern Midwest states like Kentucky and Missouri. Farther north, we do have some good snow cover, and of course in the mountains we've got deep snowpacks. But the lack of snow cover on the plains causes problems for winter wheat without having that snow there to protect the wheat. It's getting beaten down by the wind and the extreme cold temperatures. It lets that frost penetration go further deeper than it usually does. It causes problems with water mains breaking and roads cracking and things like that. So the lack of snow cover is definitely notable this year on the plains. If we look at the southern basins, the South Platte and the Arkansas River Basin, you can see that the South Platte in Colorado is doing excellent. They're at 144% of their median, and the way these graphs are set up is this dark red line, you can see what normally happens, and then we've got some high and low years scattered in there. 2011 was of note as a high year. And then this blue line is showing the current, and you can see it's right on track with 2011 there. 144% of median in the South Platte and already 90% to where they normally peak in April, which is good news for that basin. And the Arkansas Basin in southeastern Colorado, also above normal, 110% of their median and 76% of where they normally peak in the season. If we look at the Missouri River Basin farther to the north, if we look above Fort Peck, you can see that snow water equivalent is also above their average. Again, this red line would be what they normally expect. And then the high year of 1997 and the low year of 2001 here. So looking good above Fort Peck, and as well looking very good below Fort Peck to Garrison, with above normal conditions for snowpack in that basin. And then the National Resources Conservation Service will issue stream flow forecasts for the spring, the first of every month, and this is their February 1 forecast, mainly above normal flow conditions for many of the basins in the Missouri River Basin, as well as the Arkansas, but the Arkansas drops off fairly quickly as you go south, and some of these southern streams are only forecast at less than 50% of what they would normally see. So a fairly quick transition from wet to dry conditions in the Arkansas Basin. But the Missouri Basin looking good throughout, just a few low forecasts here in central Wyoming. This is the current U.S. drought monitor that was released today. Again, this is mimicking a lot of the products that I've already shown. Very dry conditions, D0 all the way to D4, exceptional drought conditions through southeastern Colorado, western Nebraska, and western Kansas. Gets a little bit better on the eastern part of Nebraska and Kansas. They're only abnormally dry. And then again, another dry pocket through, centered on Iowa, and then extends up into Minnesota and south into Missouri and east into Illinois. So just the areas that we're keeping an eye on going forward. So these next few graphs will show how the U.S. Drought Monitor and our agricultural production areas are faring out. This one is looking at the winter wheat areas. You can see the dark green is showing the major production areas, light green is minor production areas, and then the red hashing is where we've got drought present on the drought monitor. And winter wheat is 47% of that area is in drought conditions, and you can see that's mainly centered over Colorado, Kansas, and Nebraska. Same analysis, just looking at the hay crop. 25% of the hay production areas are currently experiencing drought, and you can see that the hay production areas are just a little bit farther east of where we've got those drought conditions. And then cattle areas, we've got 39% of cattle production areas experiencing some level of drought. So just a summary of the regional impacts. It's been cold, and those cold temperatures are having impacts across the region. Potential winter wheat kill due to those high winds, extreme cold, and the lack of protective snow cover on that wheat. Deep frost depths up to 4 feet in some areas are being reported. That can potentially enhance runoff in the spring. That water can't infiltrate those soils where we have snow on the ground, and can, it goes directly to the stream and can enhance the runoff with frozen soils. Flooding, we're definitely paying attention to. It's a little bit early to know exactly what's going to go on. It'll depend on how the snow melts off and how those soils start to thaw out. That will be dominated by spring temperatures, precipitation, and snowmelt. So those will be closely monitored throughout the spring to get warnings out for flooding. And then, again, spring weather dominates snowpack runoff behavior in the lower Missouri, and I'm thinking particularly of the Platte Basin in Colorado. Our spring weather really has an influence on how much water comes off the mountains here. And then one local interesting drought impact is we have a huge tumbleweed problem in southeastern Colorado, and it's mainly confined to Crowley County where that D4 drought exists. They got some late summer moisture last year, which grew some thistle. The native grasses are in bad shape, so all that really grew was the Russian thistle. Many producers had sold off their cattle from successive years of drought, so there were no cattle to graze on those thistles coming up. And what we have now is a bumper crop of thistle. This picture, you can see this house is almost completely covered in tumble, as are irrigation ditches and county roads. They're having to take plows out to try and get these tumbleweeds off the roads out there. So just impressive pictures. People are having to be rescued from their homes. So just a drought impact you don't see too often. So I'm going to now switch gears, and we're going to take a look at the forecast. This is looking at the 5-day forecast. On the left, we're looking at the quantitative precipitation forecast. And you can see there's some high amounts of precipitation forecast across the region through the mountainous areas in Montana, Wyoming, and northern Colorado, forecast to get over an inch of water. A little bit quieter in the Central Plains, but then once we shift east, we're having some severe weather in the Ohio River Valley today, and you can see widespread areas forecast to have over an inch of precipitation over the 5-day period. Looking at the temperature forecast for the next 5 days, it's not looking like any reprieve from the cold weather in the north. Those anomalies still, you can see we're slightly normal here in Colorado, but the farther north you go, you can get to 20 degrees below the normal for this 5-day period. So still persistent cold in the northern part of the region. These are the 8 to 14-day outlooks that were released by the Climate Prediction Center today. On precipitation, you can see a dry pattern over much of the region, some normal conditions through Montana, Wyoming, and then through the center of the country out towards Ohio. But you see that dry pocket there in the northern part of the region. And temperature, again, even on the 8 to 14-day, we're still seeing that persistent cold over the entire central region. So expect it to stay colder than it should be for this time of year. This is the 1-month outlook. Again, precipitation on the left and temperature on the right. Equal chances for much of the region except for western Wyoming, which is forecast to have chances above average precipitation in western Wyoming. But again, equal chances of above or below precipitation for the rest of the region. And then, again, we see this persistent cold staying here even on the 1-month outlook. And a lot of that is, not a lot, but some of it is being driven by the ice cover on the Great Lakes, and that it's going to keep that region cold around the Great Lakes. And then again, warming as you get into the southwest. So just the southwestern portion of Colorado will be slightly above normal on temperature. Looking out 3 months, really not much to talk about on the precipitation forecast, except for Kentucky and the surrounding areas are forecast to have chances for above normal precipitation, equal chances for above or below for the rest of the region. And then on temperature, again, you see that cold pocket staying over the Great Lakes and west from there into the Dakotas. Equal chances for above and below average temperatures through much of the rest of the region, again, except for southwest Wyoming, which gets in, or excuse me, Colorado, which gets into the warmer than average temperatures in the southwest. This is the El Nino Southern Oscillation Forecast. What you're looking here is as many different models. The solid colors are dynamical models. The open circles are statistical models. You can see the dynamical models have us going a little bit deeper into an El Nino. Statistical, not quite as far, but chances are pretty good that we'll have a weak El Nino by the summertime. What does that mean? El Nino years tend to be more productive growing seasons for the central region. So we can hope for that. This is the monthly drought outlook that the Climate Prediction Center also released today. And you can see drought is expected to persist over the next month where drought is already present. It's either going to persist or intensify through southeastern Colorado, Kansas, Nebraska, and also those areas farther north. Just that central part of Illinois and Missouri expected to see conditions improve or remove drought. And as we look at the seasonal drought outlook, this goes through May 31st, and this was released today. You can see that the central part of the region is supposed to improve or remove drought from the Minnesota, Iowa area, as well as western Kansas and Nebraska. Not the case for southeastern Colorado, which is very bad news for them. They are expected to see their drought persist in the southeastern portion of Colorado. So I'll just throw out the summary here. Above normal mountain snowpack throughout the region, and that's forecast to yield normal to above normal stream flows. The frozen soils from the cold temperatures and the lack of snow cover throughout the region are having some impacts. It can lead to enhanced runoff with spring rains. The temperatures will control the timing of snowmelt and the potential for that runoff versus infiltration into the soil. So we'll definitely be keeping an eye on that. And frost heaving is causing big problems with broken water lines, as well as road damage and numerous other issues. Ice jams on Midwest rivers are a real threat because of those cold temperatures. So many of the river forecast centers are monitoring those conditions closely that can increase flows with once those ice jams release. The extensive ice cover on the Great Lakes may keep the temperatures in that region below normal through early summer as we wait for that ice to melt off and for the water to warm up. And the winter wheat conditions won't be fully known until we see that crop come out of emergence or out of dormancy and see how the stands are looking. Some of them may have wind damage, damage from the cold. So we just don't know at this point what the winter wheat is going to look like. So with that, I will throw up this slide.
Thank you, Wendy. And if anyone has a question, just please speak up.
I have a question. This is Benjamin Diamond. About the regional impacts, exactly where it's expected to, there could be potential winter wheat kill?
It would mainly be in the areas where we don't have snow cover. So if you remember the graph I showed of the extent of snow cover throughout the region, it was mainly the southern portion. I'm trying to remember. I think it was mainly Nebraska and Iowa, Kansas, Eastern Colorado.
Yeah, I think primarily they're worried about winter wheat and the high plains region.
So you can see where we don't have snow cover there, and extreme cold temperatures that they've seen. So mainly the central Great Plains or southern Great Plains.
This is Patrick Erger from the Bureau of Reclamation. In your one slide, you said that drought would be improving over Kansas and Nebraska. Why is the indication that drought is going to be improving in Nebraska and Kansas there, and not in Colorado?
Yeah, let me try to answer that, Wendy, if you will, because it's an eccentricity of the way they do the outlooks. Hi, this is Doug from NOAA. And,
hey, Doug.
And the way they look at those outlooks is if they think it will improve one category over that time period. So if they're in D3, if they get to D2, the people who make these outlooks think they did a good job, okay? That's one thing to remember. The other thing to remember is that this time of year, that period, that season is a good way to look at it, of those 3 months, we normally have, during the spring, climatologically anyway, a decent amount of rain that falls, which very well may improve it a category or two. So that's the way they look at it. It's not always so clear, and it may not always mesh up with a lot of the other information that we've presented today. And the other comment I was going to make was about the change to El Nino, if there is that potential. Yes, there is a potential. I wouldn't say it's huge potential, and even if we did get to a weak El Nino, the impacts, we would have to watch very closely for what those impacts would be in the middle of the country where we are. So there's not a very strong correlation for a weak El Nino and a lot of rain, for example, in places that are currently dry. There is some, but it's very weak. And that's all I had to say.
So I'm looking at the 30 and the 90-day outlook for snow in Colorado specifically. It did look like it was just going to be normal according to your graph that you posted up.
Yeah, so normal, again, here's some more caveats for everybody so we're fully transparent here. When it says equal chances, it really does mean there's an equal chance of above, equal chance of below, and an equal chance of near normal. The reason for that is that the suite of models and such that we have are not doing a great job of really showing us a strong signal for precipitation there. So thus, so if it's white, then that's the
So it's a roll of the dice.
yeah, pretty much.
Okay, all right. Well, thank you very much.
Yeah, it's like Wheel of Fortune. You got to spin the wheel.
Absolutely.
I'll just throw in there that Colorado has been really good on snowpack so far in most of the basins except for the Southwest, and the San Juans. So not starting out below average is good for us because it's really hard to make up that deficit once we start building it. So, and you saw that the South Platte was already 90% for normal peak. So definitely looking good on snowpack in Colorado at least.
Could you go back to the slide with the Missouri River Basin?
These are put out by the Army Corps of Engineers, and they didn't give me % of normal numbers, so I don't know exactly what they are. All I can tell you is that they are above normal for this time of year.
Okay.
This is Brian DeMacos with the Montana Snow Survey Program. You want me to comment on the snowpack?
Go ahead.
Snowpack above forecast is about 112% of average, maybe a little less than that.
Okay, well, thank you very much, everyone, for joining us today, and thank you, Wendy, for your presentation. We sure appreciate it. And we'll see you again next month, and that'll be on March 20th, same time. Bye-bye, everyone.